My wife cheated on me and I raised someone else's kid, betrayal, lies, and the divorce that shattered my life. My name is Noah. I'm 34, and for most of my adult life, I measured my days by three small things. The way sunlight hit the kitchen table in the morning, the sound of Jamie's sneaker soles thumping down the hall, and the late-night sound of Claire laughing at something small on TV. I had a job that paid the bills and a house that smelled like coffee in the morning and detergent the rest of the week. It wasn't glamorous. It was steady. It was ours, and I liked it that way. People used to tell me we looked like a proper family. Polite nods, surprised smiles when I held the door for classmates at school, neighbors saying, "You've got a good kid there, Noah." Those little recognitions piled up into something warm. They were proof, I thought, that what we had built was real. I'd listen and feel a quiet pride, the sort that is not loud but it hums in your chest. I'd take Jamie to the park and watch him show off a pogo trick with the solemn seriousness of a 6-year-old who believes he's discovered gravity. Claire and I had been together since our 20s. We met at a lousy college show and somehow stuck. She organized our lives in practical, loving ways. She always remembered the dentist appointments, the soccer schedules, the weird brand of cereal Jamie preferred. She had a laugh that could dissolve my worst mood. "You're imagining heroic plumbing skills, Noah," she'd joke when I tried to fix the upstairs sink. "Just call someone." I'd grin and feel that lucky at random chance thing you get when two people find a rhythm that fits. Home was sensory to me. The dull click of the kettle warming, the way the sofa creaked in the same place where Jamie liked to climb onto my lap, the sticky sugar pattern on the dining table after a hastily eaten snack. Mornings smelled like burnt toast some days and pancakes on others. The television was a buzz in the background, not the center of anything. Weekends looked like mismatched socks and soccer games, and the same sleepy ritual of watching cartoons with a bowl of cereal between us. Those dirty little domesticities were my love language. We weren't without friction. Claire could be sharp when under pressure. I could be stubborn when I thought I was right. But those were the edges of us, not the center. We argued about paint colors and whether to get the extended warranty on a washing machine. We made up with a glass of wine and a 10-minute apology that usually smoothed things over. We had plans in shorthand, someday a new roof, maybe a trip to the coast, and the quiet agreement that we'd figure things out together. Jamie was the gravity of my life. He called out the most mundane things with excessive importance. "Dad, today I found a worm in the dirt. This is huge." He would climb into my lap at bedtime and fiddle with my wedding ring until I told him a made-up story about the ring's secret powers. "Do you love me more than the ring?" he'd ask on some late night when the house was too quiet. "Of course," I'd say, ruffling his hair. "More than the ring, more than pancakes, more than anything that needs batteries." Sometimes, when he was asleep, Claire and I would stand in the kitchen and not say anything at all. Mutual exhaustion and a private, blunt contentment. Those were the nights I thought, this is it, the thing worth protecting. I believed in the smallness of our life because it felt honest. I believed in Claire because she was the person who had shown up, no theatrics, day after day. That confidence, quiet and steady, is what made the first little oddities so easy to ignore. I remember the first time someone pointed out that Jamie looked like someone else. It felt like a throwaway comment, the kind you don't file in the mind for later. We laughed. "Kids are like that," I said. "They take from both of us." I told myself I was being protective, that reading too much into other people's chatter was petty. I chose the easier story, that we had a son who loved dinosaurs and orange juice, and that was enough. But there's a certain danger in comfort. It makes you blind to the hairline cracks. When the cracks start, they are small, a delayed text, a misremembered appointment, a shrug where there used to be detail. You think, that's just life. You let it sit. For now, I'll leave it at that. We were a family that loved each other in ordinary ways, and I was proud to be their center. I didn't yet know that a single comment, a single photograph, would seed a doubt that grew until it felt like a second life under my feet, ready to undo everything I thought I knew. "Hey," Claire said later that same week, as she passed. "Me the mail. You got the plumber's estimate." "Thanks," I said. I folded the paper on the table, looking at Jamie, who was constructing a Lego tower with unsmiling focus. "You remember the school play next month?" she asked. "I'll be there," I answered without thinking. She smiled at me then, small and sure, and I felt that warm, complacent lift again, the world making sense. It's strange how honest, tiny moments can feel both fragile and eternal until one day they don't. I'm writing this to lay the foundation cleanly. The life, the love, the little sensory details that anchor the beginning of this story. What follows will show how quickly the ordinary can be complicated by something a lot more brutal than an argument over paint.it started with an innocuous text, the kind that wouldn't normally catch my attention. My brother had sent me a photo from a weekend brunch, tagging Claire and Jamie with a smiling emoji. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I scrolled. The caption read, "Surprise," and in the background, partially visible, was a man I didn't recognize. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe a friend, a cousin, a family acquaintance I had never met. But something in the angle, the familiarity of the hand on Claire's shoulder, made my chest tighten. I asked Claire casually about the brunch that evening, the way you might inquire about groceries or a new neighbor. "Oh, it was just some friends from work," she said lightly, brushing her hair behind her ear. Her laugh felt too easy, too rehearsed. I tried to shake the unease, telling myself I was imagining things. Still, the image nagged at me. I looked at Jamie sitting nearby, Lego pieces spilling across the carpet, completely absorbed in his own world. That hand, that smile, something didn't fit. My stomach churned, but I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia. Days passed, and small inconsistencies began to pile up. Claire was protective of her phone, suddenly secretive about the simplest details of her day. Texts would pop up briefly before being swiped away, emails left unopened. She had never been this evasive, and I felt the first raw sting of suspicion, sharp and undeniable. I tried to confront it gently, a cautious, "Is everything okay?" that was answered with an effortless, "Of course, Noah. Don't worry about it." But worry had already rooted itself deep, and I couldn't shake it. The pivotal moment came when I found the medical paperwork. It was tucked carelessly in a stack of insurance forms on the kitchen counter. My hands trembled as I read through the documents, prenatal records, genetic testing recommendations, and finally, the confirmation that made the world under me tilt. Jamie wasn't my biological child. Not even close. I felt as if the air had been pulled from my lungs. A combination of disbelief, rage, and heartbreak crashed over me in waves, leaving me shaking as I gripped the edge of the counter. Every morning, every bedtime story, every laugh shared in the living room suddenly felt tainted by the truth I had never wanted to know, that I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. I walked to the bedroom, closed the door behind me, and let the silence swallow me. The boy I had raised, loved, and cherished as my own, not mine. Claire's betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was tangible. The ordinary, comforting rhythm of our life shattered into a sequence of betrayals and unspoken questions. How long had this been hidden? How many smiles, hugs, and quiet moments were lies? My mind raced, haunted by a sense of lost time, lost trust, and a life that suddenly felt like a stranger's story. That night, I couldn't sleep. Jamie slept in the next room, oblivious, breathing softly, unaware that the man he called Dad had just discovered the fracture in our world. I sat on the couch, staring at a cup of coffee I didn't drink, thinking about what it meant to be a father in every way but one, and realizing that the one that mattered most had been taken from me. The quiet domesticities that once made me feel anchored now felt like a trap, a gentle cage that had hidden the reality of Claire's deception. It was the kind of revelation that leaves a permanent mark, a dividing line between what you thought was life and what is real. I didn't confront Claire that night. I couldn't. I barely had the words to make sense of it myself. Instead, I sat in the dark, letting the weight of the truth settle into my chest. This was the beginning of the end, I knew. The end of the life I had believed in, the end of the marriage I had nurtured, and the end of the version of myself that thought he could trust completely. Everything moving forward would be measured by this fracture, by the knowledge that someone I loved could betray me so fundamentally. The next evening, I waited until Jamie was asleep before approaching Claire. My heart pounded, each step toward her feeling heavier than the last, like walking through thick mud. I kept rehearsing my words, trying to balance the anger, the hurt, and the desire for clarity. "We need to talk," I said softly, but with a firmness I hadn't needed in years. She looked up, smiling faintly. as if nothing had shifted in our lives, and my chest tightened with the stark contrast between her calm and my turmoil that I took a deep breath and showed her the paperwork, my hands trembling slightly. "Claire, explain this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her features for the first time in months, and then a mask of composure fell back into place. "Noah, it's complicated, it wasn't planned, and I never meant for you to find out like this," she started, her voice shaky but trying to sound rational. I felt a surge of disbelief. "Complicated? Betrayal isn't complicated. It's deliberate. I raised him, Claire. I changed my life for this family. And all this time, you were hiding this from me." My voice broke, and tears pricked my eyes. She shifted uncomfortably, avoiding direct eye contact, fumbling for words. "I thought you'd understand. I thought." Her sentences faltered, but her excuse felt hollow, like the walls of our home, so carefully maintained, were crumbling. I realized that no reasoning could repair the rupture between us. This was deeper than any argument, any misunderstanding that I asked her why she hadn't told me sooner, why she had let me love, nurture, and provide for a child that wasn't mine. The silence was deafening. She admitted, with a voice barely audible, that she feared losing me if I knew the truth. Fear, that word echoed in my mind. She prioritized her fear over honesty, over the trust that had built the foundation of our marriage. In that moment, I saw clearly that our bond, which I had assumed unbreakable, had been fractured irreparably. I couldn't reconcile the woman I loved with the deception I had uncovered. I had invested my entire heart, my daily routines, my sacrifices into a life that wasn't fully real. Every bedtime story, every scraped knee I had kissed, every whispered encouragement felt tainted. My anger mingled with sorrow. I wanted to yell, to break things, to make her feel the weight of what she had done. But instead, I focused on the one thing I couldn't ignore, the truth I now held in my hands, and the life I deserved to live from that moment forward. The confrontation ended not with a resolution, but with a quiet, tense understanding. Claire knew the boundaries of this new reality. I could no longer fully trust her, and the illusion of our marriage had shattered. I left the room to gather my thoughts, pacing in the living room, watching Jamie sleep peacefully, oblivious to the upheaval surrounding him. I realized I had a choice: crumble under the betrayal or reclaim my life with clarity and strength. My decision, though painful, would shape every step moving forward. The days following that confrontation felt like walking through a fog. Every morning, I'd wake up and for a split second everything seemed normal, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, Jamie's laughter echoing through the hallway, Claire humming to herself. But then reality would strike again, sharp and merciless, and I'd remember that the ground beneath me wasn't solid anymore, that I knew I couldn't make impulsive decisions. As much as my blood boiled every time I looked at Claire, I didn't want Jamie to be collateral damage in this chaos. He was innocent, just a child who had no idea about the web of deceit adults had spun around him. I had to find a way to protect myself emotionally while also shielding him from the fallout. That meant boundaries, even if Claire didn't like them. One evening, after Jamie went to bed, I sat Claire down again. My tone was no longer soft or hesitant. It carried the edge of someone who had reached his breaking point. "From now on, I need space," I told her. "We are not a couple anymore, not in the way we used to be. You made a choice years ago, and I'm making mine now. I'll continue to care for Jamie, but you and we're done pretending." She tried to protest, her voice trembling. "Noah, please, we can work through this. Therapy, counseling. We can fix us." But I shook my head. "You broke something that can't be fixed. Every time I look at you, I see lies. I see betrayal. You might think counseling will erase what you did, but it won't change the truth. And I won't spend the rest of my life trying to forget it." Setting those boundaries was excruciating. Part of me still wanted to cling to the family I thought we had, to keep believing the illusion. But I reminded myself that holding on to a lie would only destroy me further. I began sleeping in the guest room. I handled Jamie's routines on my own, making sure he felt loved and secure, while keeping my interactions with Claire limited to what was necessary for his well-being. Privately, I also started preparing for what would come next: separation. I researched lawyers quietly, scribbled down notes when I had time alone, and calculated finances late into the night. I wasn't rushing into court yet, but I knew this marriage had reached its expiration date. It wasn't about revenge or punishing Claire. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my peace, and my future. Every decision I made during those weeks carried a weight, but also a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet, seeing things clearly. Claire had controlled the narrative for too long, hiding the truth under layers of fear and manipulation. By drawing these lines, I was finally taking back my voice, my choice, and my life. Moving into the guest room was like drawing a bold line across our lives. The first night I slept there, I stared at the ceiling for hours, my mind replaying the confrontation like a broken record. The silence was suffocating, yet strangely freeing. I didn't have to force myself to lie beside her, pretending everything was normal. I didn't have to endure her reaching for me in the dark, as if touch could erase betrayal. The physical space became a symbol of the emotional distance I was demanding. Jamie noticed the change quickly. One morning, he asked, "Dad, why are you sleeping in the other room?" His little eyes looked so confused, so innocent, and it tore me apart. I didn't want to lie, but I also couldn't burden him with truths he wasn't ready for. I knelt down, hugged him tightly, and said, "Sometimes grown-ups need space, buddy, but I'm still here for you. Always." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and went back to playing with his toys. But inside, my heart broke knowing he sensed the cracks forming around him. Claire, on the other hand, fought the distance at every turn. She'd linger at my door, knock softly at night, or leave coffee by the kitchen counter as if small gestures could undo years of deception. "We can't live like this, Noah," she whispered once, tears streaking her face. "We have to fix this for Jamie." I looked at her, and for a fleeting second, I saw the woman I once loved, but then the image dissolved, replaced by the reality of who she had chosen to be. I answered firmly, "We are doing this for Jamie. He deserves honesty, stability, not a house built on lies." Daily life became a balancing act. We functioned like roommates bound by parenthood rather than partners bound by love. Meals were eaten together for Jamie's sake, but conversation between us was sparse and mechanical. I handled drop-offs at school, soccer practices, bedtime stories. Claire hovered around, sometimes trying to join in, sometimes retreating into her own corner of guilt. The atmosphere was heavy, like two people breathing in separate worlds under the same roof at night. When the house was finally quiet, I found myself questioning how long this could last. Was I strong enough to keep living in this limbo, waiting for the legal process to unfold? Was it better for Jamie to see us together but broken, or apart but honest? Every scenario felt painful, but the difference was that now I had clarity. I wasn't clinging to a fantasy anymore. I was choosing to protect myself, even if it meant dismantling the life I once thought was perfect. The emotional distance wasn't just between Claire and me. It was within me too. Part of me grieved for the man I used to be, trusting, hopeful, willing to give his entire life to someone else. That man was gone. In his place stood someone harder, but also more awake, more determined. And though it hurt like hell, I knew I was walking toward something better, even if I couldn't see it yet. The paternity test results arrived in a plain envelope, almost insultingly ordinary for something that would redefine my life. I held it in my hands for a long time, staring at the seal, my palms damp with sweat. 1,000 what-ifs circled in my head, though deep down I already knew the truth. When I finally tore it open, the words confirmed what my gut had been screaming. Since the day Claire confessed, Jamie wasn't biologically mine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there in silence, the paper trembling in my hands. It felt like watching my own identity shatter in real time. For years, I had been Dad, the man who taught Jamie to ride a bike, who cheered at his first soccer game, who held him when he had nightmares. And suddenly, science was telling me I was what? A placeholder? An accident of timing? That thought gutted me more than anything Claire had done. Jamie, of course, knew nothing of this. He still ran to me when I came home from work, still asked me to read him his favorite story for the 100th time, still called me Dad, with that innocent certainty only children have. And that's when it hit me, DNA doesn't erase the bond we built. It doesn't erase years of laughter, scraped knees, and bedtime hugs. He was mine in every way that mattered, even if biology said otherwise. But the conflict inside me was relentless. I couldn't stop picturing Claire and her affair partner, the secret moments that had created Jamie. Every time I looked at my son, a cruel voice whispered, "He's proof of her betrayal." I hated myself for even thinking it. Jamie was innocent, a child who hadn't asked for any of this. Yet, how could I separate the betrayal from the boy who symbolized it? That tug of war between love and pain consumed me. Claire tried to weaponize the test results in her favor. "See," she said one night, her voice trembling but her eyes sharp. "Now you can move past this. You don't have to carry the lie anymore." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Move past this. The results weren't a clean slate. They were a permanent scar. I told her, "You don't get it. This isn't about science. It's about the years you stole from me. About the trust one can never get back." The hardest part was imagining Jamie's future. Should I tell him the truth one day? Would he hate me for walking away, if that's where this ended? Or would he resent me for staying and pretending? Every path seemed like a minefield. But one thing I knew for certain, I loved that boy, even if he wasn't mine. And no test could take that away from me. I couldn't keep this bottled up forever. Carrying the truth alone felt like walking with a weight strapped to my chest, every breath tighter than the last. So I reached out to the people I trusted most. The first call I made was to my brother, Mark. We've had our ups and downs as siblings, but he's always been the one person who cuts through the bullshit. When I told him, his silence on the other end of the line was deafening. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then he muttered, "Jesus Christ, man. Claire did that to you." His voice was a mix of disbelief and rage. I could almost hear him pacing around his living room, trying to process. "Look, you've always been the better man between us, but if you ever needed permission to be selfish, to protect yourself, this is it. Don't let her guilt trip you into staying." My mother's reaction was different. When I drove to see her, she hugged me tight before I could even get the words out. Somehow, mothers always know when their sons are carrying something unbearable. When I finally told her, her face crumpled. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, clutching my hand. "That boy may not share your blood, but you've been his father in every way. Don't let anyone, not even Claire, tell you otherwise." Tears welled in her eyes as she added, "But don't lose yourself in trying to save what she broke." Talking to my dad was harder. He's old school, a man of few words, raised on the belief that loyalty and pride are everything. When I explained, his jaw tightened, his hands folded across his chest. For a moment, I thought he was going to tell me to man up and push through. But instead, he said quietly, "Son, I stayed in a marriage that should have ended years before. It did. I thought I was protecting you kids, but all I did was teach you how to live in a lie. Don't repeat my mistakes." Even my closest friend, Ethan, who's usually the clown of the group, turned serious when I confided in him. We were sitting in his garage with a couple of beers, the air thick with the smell of motor oil. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Listen, man, you're not weak for walking away. You're not abandoning Jamie by choosing yourself. You've given more of yourself to that boy than most real fathers ever do. That's legacy enough. But Claire, she doesn't deserve a single ounce more of you." Every conversation left me both heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because it solidified just how deeply I'd been wronged. Lighter because I finally knew I wasn't crazy for feeling like I couldn't forgive this. The people who knew me best, who loved me most, all saw the same truth I was terrified to accept. Moving on might be the only path left that didn't destroy me. After the initial storm had passed, and the raw discovery wasn't ripping me open every second, Claire suggested we try counseling. At first, I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt absurd. How do you sit in front of a stranger and neatly package betrayal, paternity lies, and shattered trust into a conversation about communication? But part of me didn't want to look like I hadn't tried. I thought, fine, let's do it. At least then I can say I gave her every chance. The first session was awkward. Claire cried almost immediately, spilling rehearsed lines about one mistake, about how she'd been scared when she got pregnant and thought I might leave her if she told me the truth. The counselor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, asked her to explain what led her to make that choice. Claire said something about being overwhelmed and confused, but the words sounded empty. like excuses she'd been polishing for years. When it was my turn to speak, I couldn't hold back. Do you even realize what you've done? To me? To Jamie? For 6 years, I've poured everything into him. I taught him to ride a bike. I stayed up all night when he was sick. And the whole time you watched me, you knew. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. The counselor gently asked me to focus on expressing how I felt rather than accusing. But how do you separate feelings from facts when the facts themselves are the wound? Session after session, the same pattern played out. Claire would cry, apologize, swear she loved me. I'd nod, listen, but feel nothing. Or worse, I'd feel a surge of anger that I was expected to comfort her. One time, when I said I wasn't sure if reconciliation was even possible, she snapped and said, "So you're just going to throw our family away?" I laughed bitterly. You threw it away years ago. I'm just now realizing it. The counselor eventually admitted that while trust could, in theory, be rebuilt, it would require radical honesty, time, and mutual commitment. I knew right then. Claire had already shown me what her commitment was worth on the drive home from our final session. I stared out the window while Claire gripped the steering wheel, silent tears running down her face. For once, I didn't reach over to comfort her. I just sat there empty. Counseling hadn't healed us. It had stripped away the last illusions I was holding on to. There was no us left to repair. IT wasn't one explosive fight that ended things. It was a slow erosion, like watching the shoreline vanish wave after wave. But I can still pinpoint the exact moment when I knew, really knew. There was no path back. Point one evening, about 2 months after the DNA test, I came home late from work. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, Jamie asleep upstairs. She had a photo album spread open, filled with pictures of our life together. Vacations, birthdays, first day of school. She looked up at me with swollen eyes and whispered, "Don't you see? We're still a family." I stared at those pictures, at the smiling faces of a man who had no idea what truths were hiding in plain sight. And instead of nostalgia, I felt anger. Anger at the manipulation, anger at the way she used the past like a leash, trying to pull me back into a life that was built on lies that I told her, calmly but firmly. We're not a family anymore, Claire. Families are built on trust. You destroyed that. She broke down, begging, grabbing my hands, saying she couldn't imagine life without me. And for the first time, I didn't feel sympathy. I felt clarity. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life bound to someone who could betray me at that depth. Staying would mean betraying myself. The breaking point wasn't rage. It was peace, a cold, steady kind of peace that came with finally making a decision. I slept in the guest room that night, and the next morning I started researching divorce lawyers. That was it. The line had been drawn, and I wasn't going back. Filing for divorce wasn't some dramatic moment in a lawyer's office. It was me sitting in my car outside a family law firm for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wasn't afraid of losing Claire. I'd already lost her the moment she betrayed me. What terrified me was how this would affect Jamie, and how I'd carry the weight of dismantling the only version of family he'd ever known. The process itself was brutal. Every document felt like carving another piece out of a life I once thought permanent. Financial disclosures, custody papers, negotiations about who would keep the house. Claire fought at first, accusing me of trying to punish her, but deep down I think she knew she didn't have the moral ground to stand on. She tried to appeal to my emotions in emails and late-night calls, saying things like, "Don't destroy what we've built," but her words carried no power anymore. The hardest part was the custody discussions. I love Jamie, I still do, but I couldn't pretend anymore. He wasn't my biological son, and every lawyer I spoke to explained the same cold truth. Unless I chose to claim legal parentage, the courts wouldn't force me to pay child support or grant custody. That tore me apart. I didn't want to punish him for her choices, but I also couldn't live shackled to a lie for the rest of my life that in the end, I chose a middle ground. I stepped back from claiming legal fatherhood, but I arranged visitation. On my own terms. It wasn't about punishing Jamie. It was about protecting my sanity while still being present, at least for a while, in the life of the boy I had raised. Claire hated that compromise. She wanted me all in or not at all. But for once, this decision wasn't about her. Walking out of the courthouse with the signed decree felt surreal. No cheering, no relief. Just a heavy, quiet finality. The chapter of my marriage was over, and for the first time in years, I was free to decide who I wanted to be without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. The weeks after the divorce were strangely quiet. My house felt both emptier and lighter at the same time. No more tension-filled silences, no more second-guessing every word or action. For the first time in years, I woke up without wondering whether the person lying next to me was truly mine, or if she was just waiting to betray me again. But healing didn't come instantly. There were nights when the silence felt suffocating. I'd sit in the living room with Jamie's toys still in a box by the couch, staring at them like they were relics of a life I once had. Sometimes I missed him so badly it hurt, and I questioned whether stepping away was the right decision. Then I'd remember the paternity test, Claire's lies, and the image of another man's face hidden in my son's features. That memory kept me grounded. I started going to therapy. At first, it was just to unload my anger, but over time it became a place where I rediscovered myself. I realized how much of my identity had been tied to being a husband and father, roles that were built on someone else's deceit. Without them, I had to ask myself who I really was. Slowly, I began to rebuild, through long runs in the morning, through reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with, through quiet moments where I finally allowed myself to breathe. Claire didn't make things easy. She would still text me, sometimes apologizing, sometimes accusing me of abandoning Jamie. She wanted me to reconsider, to come back into their lives as if nothing had happened. But every message from her only reminded me that going back would mean living with betrayal carved into every corner of my home. And I refused to accept that. The aftermath wasn't about revenge or bitterness. It was about reclaiming control. I had lost years of my life to someone else's lie. But now, finally, I was free to live honestly, even if that meant living with scars. After the initial storm of betrayal and heartbreak, I found myself alone in the quiet of our now empty home. The silence was heavy, but it forced me to confront the whirlwind of emotions I'd been trying to suppress. Anger, disappointment, and a lingering sadness that felt almost physical. I spent hours reflecting on everything that had led me here, from trusting her completely to the subtle signs I had missed. Slowly, I began rebuilding a routine for myself. Simple things at first, like cooking my own meals, taking long walks in the park, and revisiting old hobbies I had abandoned during the marriage. Work became a sanctuary. I immersed myself in projects that had once seemed mundane, finding satisfaction in small achievements and regaining a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. Friends who had drifted away during my marriage reached out, sensing my need for support, and I cautiously let them back in. Conversations over coffee or long evening calls reminded me that connection, even after betrayal, was possible. Being a father was the hardest part. I couldn't change the past, and I couldn't alter the reality that my child was not biologically mine. Yet there was a bond that went beyond genetics. I allowed myself to feel the love I had for this little person, though tinged with grief. Over the circumstances, I started spending dedicated time with them, reading bedtime stories, helping with school projects, even cheering at weekend sports games. Each moment was a mixture of joy and melancholy, a reminder that life could still hold precious experiences despite the pain. Through all this, I began to reflect deeply on who I was and what I truly valued. I realized I didn't have to define myself solely by the marriage I had lost or the betrayal I endured. I was capable of love, patience, and care, even in situations that had once seemed unbearable. And slowly, I started opening my heart to new connections, people who respected me, valued honesty, and could help me rebuild my trust in humanity. The process was neither linear nor easy. Some nights I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, and imagining different outcomes. But each morning, I reminded myself that survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about thriving despite the scars. Little victories accumulated, a laugh shared with a friend, a successful project at work, a quiet moment of pride while helping my child with homework. These moments became anchors, grounding me in the present and slowly reshaping my identity. By the end of these months, I could feel a shift within me. I had learned to embrace my autonomy, to appreciate my own company, and to find contentment without relying on anyone else's approval or love. I knew that my heart was still tender, that the wounds of betrayal would never fully vanish, but I had developed resilience I hadn't known existed. I was no longer defined by her choices or by the unfair circumstances of my family life. I had regained my dignity, my agency, and, most importantly, my hope that as the weeks turned into months, I began to notice subtle but powerful changes in myself. I no longer felt defined by the betrayal that had upended my life. Instead, I felt an emerging sense of strength that surprised even me. Friends who had witnessed my struggle marveled at my resilience, but I knew it was more than that. It was a conscious choice to reclaim my life on my own terms. Each decision I made, from how I spent my free time to the boundaries I set in new relationships, reinforced that I was no longer a passive participant in my own story, that I started exploring passions and opportunities one had long ignored. Weekends were no longer dreaded. They became a chance to try new things: photography classes, volunteering at local community projects, even joining a book club where lively discussions challenged my thinking and offered fresh perspectives. These small, yet meaningful experiences reminded me that life could still be full of excitement and connection. My relationship with my child also began to take a healthier shape. I focused on being present in ways that mattered most, creating routines that offered stability and love. Despite the complicated truth of their parentage, I embraced the role of a supportive figure in their life without forcing a false narrative. It was in these moments, helping with homework, celebrating little achievements, sharing stories before bed, that I realized family could be defined by care and commitment rather than biology alone. Simultaneously, I rebuilt my professional and social identity. Colleagues noticed a newfound confidence, a quiet assurance in my decisions, and this translated into career progress I hadn't expected during the turmoil. I nurtured friendships that had endured the upheaval, and I allowed myself to be open to new connections, but with clear boundaries, knowing now that trust had to be earned and not blindly given. Emotionally, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The betrayal, the shock, and the heartbreak no longer controlled me. They were part of my history, yes, but not my present or my future. I had learned to find joy in simple things, pride in my accomplishments, and peace in knowing I could survive and thrive on my own. By the end of this phase, I was no longer just surviving. I was actively creating a life I valued. I had rebuilt my self-worth from the ashes of betrayal and discovered that independence and self-respect were among the most powerful tools I could possess. And while some nights still brought memories of the past, I faced them with a calm resolve, knowing that I was finally the person I was meant to be, free from deceit and fully in control of my own story. Eventually, the day came when I truly felt free. I looked around my home and realized it was filled with laughter, warmth, and choices I had made for myself, no longer dictated by lies or betrayal. My ex-wife had moved out, and although it was painful to accept the end of what I thought would be my lifelong partnership, I felt an unexpected relief. I had preserved my dignity, my values, and my sense of self-respect, and I knew that nothing could take that away. Raising my child became a journey of love without compromise. I created an environment of honesty, trust, and stability, proving to myself that family is about more than genetics. It's about care, consistency, and genuine presence. I began to see opportunities where before I had seen obstacles, and each day brought small victories, new hobbies, supportive friends, professional achievements that reinforced that my life could be fulfilling and meaningful. I also learned the invaluable lesson that trust, once broken, cannot always be restored, and that sometimes the bravest choice is to walk away rather than stay in a life shadowed by betrayal. Despite the heartbreak, I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more grounded in my own worth. I felt gratitude for my resilience, my ability to love without losing myself, and the chance to build a life on my own terms. Standing on the threshold of this new chapter, I realized that the pain of the past had become the foundation of my growth. I was no longer a victim of deceit. I was the architect of my future, proud, confident, and free. And in that freedom, I discovered a profound sense of peace, proof that even after the deepest betrayal, life could still be beautiful, hopeful, and entirely mine to live.